be another one of those dislike magnet videos, isn't it? Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about the new album from Arca. Arca is a Venezuelan producer. Time for our regularly scheduled mispronunciation. Alejandro Gersi is this guy's real name. Been getting increasingly popular over the past couple of years for his whacked out, experimental style. He's done production work for Kanye West, Bjork, Kalela, and FKA Twigs. Had a couple of low-key releases, 2 EPs and a mixtape called And then he released his debut album, Zen, which brought him into a section of electronic music far more out there and experimental. And in my opinion, this album, Zen, was freaking amazing. It was amorphous and strange, gave zero fucks about rhythms and traditional structures, and sounded absolutely fantastic. All the weird melodies and creepy atmospheres made for such an otherworldly experience. It did take a couple listens to fully grow on me, but yeah, I thought it was awesome. It was kind of like One Tricks Point Never, sort of, but like obviously stylistically different. I was a little less enthusiastic about Arca's second album, Mutant, which went even further into experimental territory and pushing the boundaries of what can be considered music at all, much in the same way artists like Outica do sometimes. Extremely experimental, noisy. It was a bit too far out there for me to really connect with it in any significant way, but I could undoubtedly appreciate it for its artistic merit and found all the weird structures, or lack thereof, to be quite interesting. Definitely a very, very nice intellectual exercise, but I also kind of found it to run together a little bit. Didn't grab my attention as much as I'd like, despite the consistent weirdness. I don't know, when you go too far into these harsher experimental tones, you start to lose me. I think I've made it clear in the past, I don't typically enjoy that kind of sound. Though I will give it credit, hearing this album finally allowed me to have a giant epiphany on Twitter where I pinned down the exact reasons for my not being able to get into Flume, but I digress. I definitely have a lot of respect for Arca. I get exactly why he's developed a fan base, even if I don't always enjoy his stuff. Having someone push the boundaries of what is traditionally considered listenable is always a good thing for any music. But I won't lie, I was a little wary going into his third self-titled album. He had one album I loved, and one album was okay. It's not the strongest of track records, to be honest, but I jumped in regardless. I figured if nothing else, we were gonna get some strange, otherworldly stuff that went into the outer reaches of electronic music, and possibly music itself. But I at least hoped he wouldn't go so far out to the point of me not enjoying it as much. So, how did it turn out? This guy sings now, apparently. Okay then. I wasn't sure what to expect out of this album, but this was not it. And I'll be honest, on first listen of this album, I didn't like it at all. I found this guy's voice to be deeply unsettling, despite constantly reminding myself that was the entire point. And he sings on nearly every song here. I mean, it's not like Andrew Taggart, whose voice made me want to burn things. No, this guy was very, I don't want to say operatic, because he's not like screaming or anything, he's a lot more subdued, but I'm reminded of more like really old classical choral music. I won't lie, this very subtly rubbed me personally the wrong way. I think I can enjoy this kind of stuff every now and then, but when I was a little kid, like really little, before I was into electronic music at all, like age 8 or 9 or something, I used to really hate classical music because it creeped me out. Especially when there were singers that sounded like this. When I was listening to this album for the first time, all I could think was, man, if you'd given this album to me at that age, I might have been scarred for life or something. This guy was making electronic versions of that kind of music, which, as a kid, would have given me nightmares. Of course, I'm no longer 8 or 9 years old, I'm 21, and I'm obviously over that by now. And with repeat listens, I'm definitely warming up to it. This album is probably a little closer to my wheelhouse, in personal enjoyment-wise, than Mutant was. And while I'm not gonna lie and say that I particularly enjoy Arca's voice, I think the album overall it's slowly growing on me a little bit. For one thing, the symphonic quality of some of these synths, along with his singing in many places, made this whole album end up reminding me of the first half of Goldie's Saturn's Return album. Now, I won't go into too much detail on that one, as my Pendulum discography review made me want to cover this album sooner rather than later. Maybe look out for that one after I get the Orbital reviews or something. Maybe sooner if I feel like it, but whatever. The first track of Saturn's Return is this hour-long symphonic ambient piece called Mother, where Goldie himself took the mic, kinda like Arca did here. Though Goldie sounded a lot more like a normal-sounding R&B type singer. I think I'd see myself more likely to return to that than I would to this. Although Goldie also has the benefit of familiarity. I first heard Saturn's Return when I was in high school, and I've only just gotten into Arca over the past week or so. And I already discussed Arca's voice, but while I'm at it, let me discuss Arca's voice even more. As I said, most of these songs have his voice on it. Only 4 instrumentals out of 13 tracks. And he does change it up a bit, like his voice is significantly deeper on the track Fugaces. While he does a lot of, like, falsetto type usually, he's always singing in Spanish too. And while I did take Spanish in high school, I'm a little rusty. I know piel means skin, I know anoche means last night. I picked up little stuff like you don't know or I will never know in the lyrics. I just understand little bits of it, which makes for some familiarity, but losing my Spanish skills over my college years also makes it, like, just esoteric enough to fit with Arca's style and the album sounds. But going back to his voice, I do get sick of it after a while. On the track Sin Rumbo, this dude literally sounds like he's yawning. Like, he really makes this album a dirge in some areas. I have noticed that this album, along with Arca's other albums, is not the kind of thing that ever works when listening to on my commute, especially in the morning. Zen kinda worked, but I only liked half of it both times I heard it on my commute. And thankfully it wasn't the same half both times, but I digress. Point is, for whatever reason, I've only been able to fully enjoy this guy's music when it's late at night. I mean, it is some pretty dark and depressing stuff here. Very much have to be in a certain mood for this stuff. I imagine there's some people already screaming at me like, how dare you not enjoy Arca's music every time of day? But yeah, purely because of this dude's voice, I don't see myself putting this on very often. But that's just me, personally. I can see most people are not having this same issue I am. He just kind of wore out on me after a while. I can maybe get behind tracks like Piel and Miel if I happen to be in a particular mood, but there are songs on here like Anoche and Coraje that just don't do much for me. Anoche particularly just creeping me out, kind of getting under my skin, and Coraje just being kind of boring for me, but whatever. By the same token, while I might not personally care for every song on here, there are plenty of songs on here that I actually really liked. Basically all the instrumentals on here were winners in my book, calling back a little bit to the stuff he did on Zen. Whip is probably my least favorite of the 4 instrumentals on here. It's just whip sounds modulated and glitched up. I mean, it's certainly interesting. There's not really anything to it though. Feels a touch out of place too. But the other stuff is nice. The other instrumentals are Urchin, Castration, and Child. Urchin has a lot of minimalistic synth melodies and aggressive but very slow and choppy beats, as well as these almost kind of like out-of-tune piano sounds, the latter of which is the main focus of the track Child. Castration is kind of like Urchin, has a lot of the same sounds but is much more intense and up-tempo. I can definitely get behind this guy's production in general. His weirdness is not something I can see anyone replicating, and despite being very creepy and off-putting, is more often than not pretty fun to listen to. And for the record, Arca's voice doesn't ruin every song he's on. First of all, as I did mention, his style of singing does undoubtedly make sense, and is a great match with Arca's production. And second of all, any of the less minimalistic compositions on here that like weren't just pure ambient and him singing. Those tended to be my favorites. I already mentioned Fugaces being a standout because his voice was deeper, made for some nice variety that late in the album. And the symphonic quality to it was actually a bit more calming this time around. I could get behind that one for sure. And the same goes with Saunter as well. That one combines his slightly deeper tones of voice with one of his creepiest and strangest instrumentals. I think I like the instrumental more here than his voice. I mean, it might not be all falsetto-y, but it does sound very odd and off-putting. But whatever, not a bad track. Strangely enough though, the track Reverie, which has a lot of similar vocal tones to Saunter, I like that one a lot more. The instrumental felt fuller, more interesting too. Definitely the kind of thing I could groove to. Awesome song there. But my actual favorite track on this album has to be Desafío. I suppose it's not surprising this is probably the most conventional sounding and least weird track on this album, but damn, this stuff is good. The melodies are absolutely fantastic, and the slightly more conventional beat make it more accessible than the other tracks on here. Sounds absolutely beautiful, but still fits perfectly alongside the rest of the album. So yeah, this album's kinda all over the place, personal enjoyment-wise. There are tracks I enjoy a lot, tracks I enjoy a little, and tracks I don't enjoy much at all. But I'd also be lying if I said I thought any of these tracks were bad. Just some of them aren't really my thing. For what it's worth, I have a ton of respect for the weird stuff Arca is doing in the world of electronic music. Somebody's gotta go out to those far reaches, and he manages to do so in a fairly easy-to-enjoy manner, as at least for most people. I'm sure most people here are going to enjoy this album a lot more than I did. I'm probably not gonna keep this on my iPod, maybe just a few tracks here and there, and I'll just stick to Zen after that. But I do think this album is still very well made, and Arca is just as unique and ultra-creative a producer as he always has been. I'm overall feeling a solid 7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.